Hey everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. All right, let's talk about something that on the surface looks like a billionaire rivalry story. But underneath it, it's really about the future of the American state. Because when people see Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos competing over rockets, lunar landers, and government contracts, it's easy to reduce it to ego, personality, or just two ultra-wealthy men trying to outdo each other in space. But if you zoom out a little bit, what you're actually watching is something much bigger. You're watching Space Race 2.0, and this time, it's not Washington versus Moscow. It's Washington partnering with billionaires. During the original Cold War space race, the logic was simple. Space was a theater of national power. When the Soviet Union launched Sputnik in 1957, it wasn't just about a satellite. It was about demonstrating technological superiority, missile capability, ideological confidence. When the United States responded by building NASA and eventually landing astronauts on the moon through Apollo, that wasn't a commercial venture, it was a geopolitical message. The American flag on the moon was an extension of American state power. Back then, the state was the driver. NASA designed, NASA built, NASA commanded, private contractors existed. Of course, but they were subordinate to a centralized national mission. Space was too strategic, too symbolic, too expensive to outsource in any meaningful sense. Now fast forward to today. NASA still exists. The moon is back on the agenda through the Artemis program. China is rising as a space power. There are real geopolitical stakes again, but look closely at who is actually building the hardware. It's SpaceX. It's Blue Origin. It's not just government engineers, it's corporate ecosystems. And that shift tells us something profound about how America now exercises power. Let's start with Musk. SpaceX began as a private gamble that many experts thought would fail. Rockets are not software. You can't just iterate your way out of physics. And yet, over the past decade, SpaceX has not only survived, it has fundamentally altered launch economics. Reusable rockets, lower costs per kilogram to orbit, vertically integrated manufacturing. SpaceX forced the entire aerospace industry to rethink its assumptions. Today, SpaceX launches astronauts for NASA. It services the International Space Station. It dominates commercial launch markets. And under NASA's Artemis program, SpaceX is developing the human landing system that could put American astronauts back on the moon. Now look at Bezos. Blue Origin took a slower path. Less flashy at first, more methodical, focused heavily on long-term infrastructure. Bezos has consistently argued that humanity's future depends on moving heavy industry off Earth. He talks about millions of people living and working in space, about orbital habitats, about preserving Earth as a residential and light industrial zone. And like Musk, he is now deeply tied into NASA's lunar ambitions, building components meant to support sustained presence on the moon. So here's the question, who is leading whom? Is the US government directing a national space strategy and using private companies as tools? Or are private companies shaping the trajectory of American space policy? That question matters because it reflects a broader transformation in how the American state functions in the 21st century. In the Cold War, the model was centralized mobilization. Washington identified a strategic priority and marshaled national resources toward it. The interstate highway system, the Manhattan Project, Apollo, these were state-driven, state-coordinated efforts. Today, the model is more hybrid. The government sets broad goals: return to the moon, maintain leadership in orbit, compete with China, but instead of building everything internally, it issues contracts, creates competitive frameworks, and leverages private innovation. NASA no longer owns the entire stack. It buys services. This is not accidental. It's partly ideological. Since the 1980s, American political culture has increasingly favored market mechanisms over bureaucratic expansion. Both Republicans and many Democrats have embraced some version of public-private partnership as a default approach. Outsourcing, contracting, competitive bidding, these became features of governance, not exceptions. But it's also structural. The technological frontier now moves faster than traditional government procurement cycles. Silicon Valley speed doesn't map neatly onto federal acquisition regulations. By partnering with firms that can iterate quickly, raise private capital, and take risks outside congressional budget cycles, NASA effectively buys agility. Yet agility comes with trade-offs. When SpaceX becomes indispensable to us launch capability, that's efficiency, but it's also concentration of power. When one private network like Starlink provides satellite communications in war zones, including in conflicts where U.S. interests are involved, the line between corporate decision and geopolitical consequence blurs. Musk has at times made decisions about Starlink's availability that had real implications for military operations. That's a level of influence that traditionally belonged to state actors. In other words, Space Race 2.0 isn't just about rockets. It's about sovereignty. Who ultimately controls critical infrastructure in space? The elected government, or corporate leaders with their own visions, timelines, and political instincts. And here's where China re-enters the picture. Unlike the United States, China's space program remains tightly integrated with the state. The China National Space Administration operates within a system where strategic industries are directly guided by national planning. There is private activity in China's space sector, but it operates under a different political framework. The state retains primacy, so we have two models emerging. Model 1, state-centric, hierarchical, centrally coordinated. Model 2, networked, contract-based, partnership-driven, heavily reliant on private capital. The U.S. has chosen the second model. Now supporters argue this is exactly why America will win. The dynamism of private entrepreneurship, the willingness to experiment, the competitive pressure between companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin, these are strengths. They produce innovation faster than rigid state bureaucracies can. And there's truth to that. Reusable rockets were not the product of committee consensus. They came from a founder willing to risk bankruptcy multiple times. That kind of risk tolerance is hard to replicate in a government agency accountable to Congress and taxpayers. But critics worry about long-term coherence. When strategy depends on billionaire vision, what happens if those visions diverge from national priorities? What happens if financial pressures, shareholder expectations, or personal rivalries shape timelines that were once matters of national planning? Look at the Artemis program itself. NASA originally selected SpaceX alone for the lunar lander contract, prompting political backlash and legal challenges. Eventually, Blue Origin was brought in as well. The process wasn't just technical, it was political. Members of Congress lobbied for geographic distribution of contracts. Companies sued. Agencies negotiated. This is not the Apollo era of singular national focus. It's a decentralized ecosystem where state, corporation, and politics constantly interact. And then there's Mars. Musk's long-term vision has always centered on Mars colonization. A self-sustaining city on another planet, a backup for civilization. That's not a short-term government objective. NASA's near-term focus is the moon. Partly because it's strategically closer, partly because it offers incremental steps toward deep space missions. So which vision prevails? If SpaceX's capabilities outpace NASA's planning, does policy adapt to the company, or does the company align to the policy? This is where the idea of national role transformation becomes crucial. The United States government is no longer simply a commander in technological competition. It's increasingly a coordinator, a regulator, a purchaser, and occasionally a referee between powerful private actors. That's a fundamentally different posture. It reflects broader trends across American governance, whether in cybersecurity, social media, AI, or pharmaceuticals. The frontier is often led by private firms. The state follows, shapes, incentivizes, sometimes constrains, but rarely monopolizes. In space, that shift feels especially dramatic because of the symbolism. Space has always represented ultimate sovereignty. The ability to launch, to navigate, to project power beyond Earth's atmosphere, that's as strategic as it gets. And yet today, The rockets carrying American astronauts are built and operated by companies whose CEOs tweet freely, clash publicly, and pursue independent corporate agendas. That doesn't mean the state is weak. It means the state is operating differently. There's also an economic dimension. Space is no longer purely prestige-driven. Satellite broadband, Earth observation, launch services, these are commercial markets worth billions. The line between national security payload and commercial payload is thin. By cultivating a robust private space economy, the U.S. expands its industrial base, spreads cost burdens, and embeds strategic capability in market structures. That can be resilient. It can also be messy. And perhaps that's the defining feature of American power in this era. Messy resilience. Not centrally choreographed like mid-20th century mobilization, but distributed. Competitive. Sometimes chaotic, yet still capable of producing breakthroughs. So when we frame this as Musk versus Bezos, we're missing the deeper transformation. This isn't just about who lands on the moon first or whose rocket is more powerful. It's about whether the American state in the 21st century is comfortable sharing the frontier of sovereignty with private capital. It's about whether public purpose can be advanced through market competition without losing strategic coherence. And it's about how democracy manages technological power that is no longer confined within government walls. Space Race 2.0 is not a replay of the Cold War. There's no single adversary defining the narrative, even though China's rise adds urgency. There's no singular Manhattan Project moment. Instead, there's an evolving ecosystem. NASA sets direction. Congress funds. Companies innovate. Courts arbitrate disputes. Founders pursue legacy. All of it intertwined. And maybe that's the most American outcome imaginable. Not a monolithic state project, but a competitive arena where ambition, capital, and national interest overlap in complicated ways. The real question isn't whether Musk or Bezos wins. The real question is whether this hybrid model can sustain long-term strategic leadership in space without fracturing into competing agendas, without over-concentrating power in unelected hands, and without losing sight of national purpose. Because the moon isn't just a rock in the sky. It's a mirror, and what it reflects right now is an America, redefining how it projects power, how it organizes innovation, and how it balances state authority with private ambition. That's Space Race 2.0. And it's only just beginning. Thanks for watching.